All right, guys, welcome to the Buff Show. We got an interesting podcast coming your way. This one's for sellers, titled Risk Management, and just kind of navigating the contract and like moving. There's a lot of like moving parts, especially at the end of a contract. And hopefully we're going to kind of clear up some of the questions there.
And the thought process behind this would be one of the first questions the sellers ask is, can you market my property? Can you get my property sold? But one of the biggest questions they should be asking is, can you manage the risk that I'm going to be having throughout this transaction?
Which I don't think they think about that.
Not till about the last week.
But contractually, there's a ton, there's a ton of risk that you're entering into a contract. There's earnest money. We're going to talk about that, but that's like the glue that kind of glues the contract together, where if somebody breaches it, it's like, okay, well, this is like how much was in there.
Well, people treat earnest money like it's just this number, it's a standard number of 1% or whatever some agents say. There's all these different variables around it, but they don't realize how important you having some kind of safety for the plan that you're going moving forward is. Like, earnest money should be considered not in just like what a standard, but what will make it so that my family's comfortable in a worst case scenario.
And it goes both ways. I don't think people think about that, but buyers, like, if a buyer wants to have like a solid contract, they should be offering more than like $1,000 earnest money.
Yeah, because it doesn't. $500 on a contract means nothing.
No. Have you seen that lately? 500 or 1,000? I had one 1,000 recently.
I think I've had 1,000 this year once,
but few and far between.
2021, I saw 500 or 1,000 a lot. I felt like at least on a quarter of my contracts, people just not wanting to put a lot of money in.
Yeah. What have you been seeing?
I had a couple of townhomes where they were a little bit like lesser priced, and so
it was a lot less.
Yeah, their earnest money that they contributed was about 1,000.
Was it? I find most, and I think kind of the maybe rule of thumb is like about 1% of the purchase price is most standard. Like right now, 5 to 10 grand. In that range. So, yeah, let's jump into it. So, okay, what is earnest money? How would you define that?
The base description of earnest money is skin in the game, is the way I explain it to people. It's you laying down money in an escrow account that proves that you're putting some kind of skin in the game or putting money on hold, showing that you have interest in the property.
You're serious about the purchase.
Yeah. And it is like the lower the earnest money, I guess the less faith that the sellers are probably going to have in the buyer being able to perform. Like it makes it less believable, I guess. But if a buyer's like, hey, I'm going to put $100,000 earnest money down, like that feels like, whoa. Feels like a lot.
It does, but that also $100,000 in earnest money down also, because people have to realize that if they default on the loan or something happens, there's scenarios where you got to owe somebody double what that earnest money is on both sides, possibly in some scenarios.
Yeah.
And so once you start playing in a $100K range, you got to be working with somebody. You got to be really aware of what you're doing. So both extremes are bad, is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I guess just going over the basics, earnest money, something the buyers put down, it's negotiated in the contract. And this is risk management for sellers. So we want to inform you sellers on how to best manage the risk of you carrying the contract and everything like that. Earnest money is kind of liquid damage. If the buyer goes through with the deal, it just goes towards their down payment. It's just part of their money into the deal, their down payment. If they default, that earnest money goes to you for liquid damages. So if you're all packed up, it's a day of closing, you're ready to move, and you get a call from the buyers, hey, we can't execute the contract, we can't perform. That earnest money is there to fix all of the problems or inconveniences that you would then have to deal with putting things back together again.
Well, and the way the Utah real estate purchase contract is written is that if a buyer defaults, the seller is supposed to be able to go for extra, but it really doesn't work that way. With the Utah real estate purchase contract, between financing and appraisal and between the closing, if the buyer backs out for financing reasons, you really can only go for their earnest money, is the way that this contract is written.
Yeah.
And so it's if that amount, if you're planning on that, that amount needs to be enough to be able to compensate you if you get 2 or 3 steps down the road and all of a sudden it gets canceled. That should be enough for you to be able to figure out life around it, I guess.
Yeah. So if you're all packed up, you've signed a lease, and
hired a moving trailer,
hired a moving
put a bunch of
company.
stuff in a storage truck or storage container, whatever.
Yeah, you got to make sure that you have enough earnest money there that it's going to help cover some of those costs.
Even if if you're planning on not making your mortgage the next month or something, there should be some kind of a buffer you would hope to make it so your life isn't completely out of control, I guess, for a second.
Yeah.
Right. Don't put down more than you're willing to lose.
Yeah. So as far as buyers' contingency points, they're going to have due diligence. What's due diligence?
It's the time when you can go through all your inspections and everything, make sure that everything is set in stone and you're happy with the way that things are going to go. By the time due diligence is up,
Yeah, their money starts to become
Yeah.
more concrete, but then you have financing and appraisal. That's basically where buyers can just make sure they're good financially, they can afford it, they're comfortable with those terms. It's kind of I don't love how financing and appraisal reads because it's like it says if for any reason buyer is unsatisfied with the terms and conditions of the loan, they can back out and get all their earnest money back unless you put something in there. There's a section in the REPC, I think it's like 8.3 BI, where it's like this portion of earnest money is non-refundable after due diligence, but before financing and appraisal. Because some buyers like use financing and appraisal as like an extended due diligence period. Like, oh, I'm not happy with my loan. We're going to back out of this because of inspection items or whatever. And I've seen contracts. So you want your due diligence to be like, that's typically like what, 2 weeks on average?
Yeah, 2.
Financing and appraisal,
3 weeks to 4 weeks.
3 to 4 weeks. And then you want to make sure you have a gap between financing and appraisal and settlement. I've seen some agents set it up where
they're butt to butt. They're right next to each other.
Yeah. And that's like not enough time because the idea is after financing and appraisal, the earnest money becomes non-refundable unless it's agreed upon in the contract otherwise, but typically non-refundable. And so then you as a seller have the assurance that you're like, we're good to start packing, signing a lease, finding other properties to buy, whatever it is. Like you have you know that the buyers are not likely going to walk away from their earnest money.
Well,
It does happen.
And that's the financing appraisal. After the financing appraisal deadline is the moment that when sellers start thinking, okay, when can I start thinking that this might actually happen? That's one of the best days it's not a guarantee it'll happen, but at least it's a true indicator that it should start being able to go through. Once your financing, once your appraisal's back, once that earnest money becomes non-refundable, it would be quite a hubbubaloo for somebody to try to back out for sure.
Yeah. Because what I would say probably 30% of the time, deals fall out during due diligence. And then less than that for financing and appraisal issues.
Maybe 10% for that ish.
Yeah.
That's a guesstimate. That's a straight guesstimate.
Yeah, I would say you're probably maybe even less, but it's not very often. And then after that, like have you ever had anybody back out after financing and appraisal and lose their earnest money?
I have not.
I haven't either.
I had it once. And I was on the buyer side. The clients were just like, we don't want to buy it anymore. I'm like, you're going to lose your earnest money. It was like 10 years ago when earnest money was $500. So it wasn't that much. But nowadays, I don't see earnest money less than like $5,000 very often. That seems to be when it mostly is. So after financing and appraisal, so between financing and appraisal and settlement, that's a time when you should start planning, packing, doing all that because you know the deal is more likely to close. And again, if you feel like you need more earnest money, negotiate that in the beginning. Like think ahead, like on bigger houses that are like, let's say it's an 8,000 square foot house. There's a lot of furniture. There's a lot of stuff. The house is selling for $2 million. Like I would not accept earnest money on a transaction that high under like 20 to 50 grand.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you need a good amount of skin in the game because just the time and effort to take to move that house, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of costs, a lot of things like that.
Especially if you have to hire like specific movers for certain furniture.
Yeah, and a lot of the moving companies, they're like, after a certain point, they're not going to give you like a refund on your money and stuff like that. So, and if you move, say you move all the way out, and you have to move back, anyways, just be thinking about all those things. How about closing? This is a big one. So Peyton, we're set to close on next Wednesday. Can I move into my house? Or I guess this is a seller. When should we start moving and packing and stuff like that?
But you got to be out of the house by next Wednesday. Is it?
And maybe the buyers want to move in early.
Well, I guess that would be almost situation to situation. If the contract says that upon recording, I think I'm saying that correctly, then you have until that day at 5 p.m. to be out of the house. Is that,
Yeah.
or I guess once it records? Never mind. Once it records, you have to be out of that house. But if you record or you sign documents at 9 a.m. in the morning, it'll probably fund and record by probably 1 or 2 that day would be a standard process. So if you're wanting to make a plan, I'd be ready to move out the day before you sign.
Get packed up and ready the day before.
Yeah, and I would
I
try to be out of the house that morning probably because
Make that
it's
morning about your broom clean of the house
Yeah.
and keeping it.
Yeah, and I always try and have sellers sign like a day or two before.
yeah.
So like they're not rushing on the day of signing because you can sign earlier. Like signing or settlement basically means like you've signed, the funds have been delivered, and all the paperwork has been delivered to the title company. So the title company has your documents and the funds from the buyer, and then funds from the lender, I believe. And then you
And
can
then
have up
record
to 4 days after to close.
But that I've never had
Never really happens, but
Yeah.
still kind of keep in mind like
technically.
if you had a buyer that was like, we're going to wait till 4 days after, technically they could. And then I always try and have like settlement be on like a Wednesday or Thursday because it seems like if you do Friday, then it's too close to maybe getting pushed over to Monday.
one problem and all of a sudden it's pushed to Monday.
Yeah. But the second it records, like you really need to be out like that time basically. Funds and records, you need to be moved out. So a lot of sellers will be like, well, we're buying a house. We need this house to sell in order for us to buy. And like it's really hard for us to move like out of this house into the next one, like a lot of moving parts same day. There are some ways that we can like give you a little bit of a buffer there, but there's some risk involved. So let's talk about some of those.
He's talking about a lease back or he's talking about possession maybe 48 hours after any of those options.
Yeah, so in the purchase contract, you can do like delayed possession or when possession will be, and you can have it be X amount of days or hours after closing, which is funding and recording. So let's say we close today at noon and you have a 24-hour delayed possession. So that means tomorrow at noon, the buyers could then move in. What are the advantages and disadvantages to that?
Makes it so you don't have to be completely out of the house at signing. It takes a little bit of risk off of you in a way.
Yeah.
It gives you that extra time that if something bad did happen, you're not necessarily in the totally moved out already, I guess.
Yeah.
A little more breathing room.
That's I haven't looked at it that way. Yeah, so you're not all the way moved out, but I would say the downside is what if like the house burns down or floods or like it gets vandalized or the sewer line collapses.
How do you figure that out?
Yeah, and the purchase contract doesn't really cover that in like that short time period. So that there's some risk there. If it's past like 48 hours or 2 days, I'd recommend doing like the short-term lease back.
Yeah, because the rental contract's more defined.
That puts in way more provisions there, and you can do that up if you're doing a loan up to 60 days. If you're not doing a loan, you can go longer than that. Most lenders want, if it's like a primary house, they want you to occupy it within 60 days after closing.
So a lease back works really good too, is if you're trying to find a house to buy. So a lot of people do a lease back for 30 days or something, so that after they close, if it gives them more time to find a house to buy, and they get transferred over to that house and close and everything as well.
Yeah.
But you're right; it always adds that extra liability. That what happens if you're playing in that house and your truck throws a rock and blows up a window?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just adds more inconvenience to your life for sure. So just be aware of that.
What pros and cons do you have for the lease back? What?
Honestly, I've done 2 leaseback agreements in my experience so far. We haven't had any really big cons with that. The only thing, that I would have, or that my clients had run into was just like little inconveniences. Like it rained super heavy and the garage kind of got a little extra water. And like, so what do they do there? And so, little things like that happened with my clients, but I don't know. Other cons that we've experienced haven't been anything like super, super bad. But I think, there are the possibilities that the sellers could be responsible for that damage if if it happens during that time. So
I think that's fair. I mean, I've done probably 20 or 25 leasebacks at this point. I've never actually had
Anything bad?
any true issues,
Yeah.
really.
What about disputes about deposit and getting deposits back? Didn't
I've
you
had
have
a
one?
couple of disputes, yeah, but it was over $300, and it was like two people who were very sensitive at the moment in time. So I think that that's fair, but
Yeah.
it's also such a small scenario. Nobody's going to sue somebody over $300.
Right.
right.
But if it was more,
But if it was $10,000, yeah.
Yeah. So I had one on a house where we closed it. The sellers got like can't remember how many days lease back. It was like 2 or 3 weeks. And within that time frame, the sewer line backed up. And they had somebody come out and try and like roto-rooter it, and they were hitting like it actually collapsed. And we brought it up to the buyers, so the sellers were still living in there, but it was then the buyer's house. And brought it up to the buyers, and they're like, we haven't even lived there. We know it's our house, but we don't want to pay for this. Like, you're living there. It's been your house all these years. Like, for some reason, I get it, not for some reason, but the buyers don't quite feel like it's their house, even though it is, because they haven't moved in. And so then we were stuck in this weird situation where the sellers were like, man, I just wish we would have like wiped our hands, moved out of this house, because like this was such a weird freak accident. And because we're still living in here, like the buyers are adamant that we cover this cost because they don't want to cover it. But I think had they moved out and that happened, it would have been like, oh shoot, well that sucks. Like, you're living there.
It's your
It is what it is.
responsibility.
Yeah, it's your fault.
A
Or it's
clear
your-
cutoff point.
It's your problem, but at that point, it was kind of like in the gray area, and the sellers ended up paying for the sewer line to be repaired, and it ended up being like a couple grand. But so thankfully, it wasn't like 10 or 15 grand, but it was still quite a bit of money, and it worked out. But I would try and avoid. It's cleanest if you can have possession be the same as funding and recording. So the second it changes ownership is the second, like, the buyers move in and the sellers move out.
And as a seller, it's worth making yourself a little uncomfortable trying to get stuff moved in that specific
Yeah.
way than it is to. I do agree with that it's just a simpler.
It
It's worth inconveniencing yourself to get that figured out.
if you
if
can
possible.
there, and I've done leasebacks, I've done delayed closing or delayed possession, and it can be done, and it can be done smoothly, but there's just a lot of things that could happen or go wrong. Like, let's use it. Like, what happens if like an earthquake came and like just leveled the house, and you were in like a 30-day leaseback period? Like, insurance doesn't cover earthquake damage, but I don't know that. I haven't read through the short-term leaseback recently to.
It adds complications. What you're
Yes.
saying.
It does add a lot of complications, and I think it's just easier. I know for convenience purposes, it's nice to have somewhere to be for that time period. But if you can get out of there and just kind of wipe your hands from it and move on, I think that's the best.
Well, and as a seller, if you are selling your house and buying another house, the best scenario that you can try to do on that as well is if you can make it so that those dates align, so that you're funding and recording on the same day or one day apart, and get all of your, this is hard, I get that, but get all of your stuff either into storage or into a big moving truck that you can rent for a day. It's hard to do, but that is a way I see a lot of people doing that, where
Yeah.
they just try to get it all. It's one big old move somewhere.
Yep, and you just rip the Band-Aid off. And I'm glad you brought that up, because if you are, let's say you're selling a house and buying another house, but you buying the house is contingent upon you selling this house, which we have a whole nother podcast on, but you want to make sure your deadlines are like matching or a day after or 2 days after on your purchase. Because if your sale falls through and that's contingent upon you buying this property, you want to make sure that you're not overextended, and then you're going to lose earnest money on this one. And then make sure your earnest money is equal or less than the earnest money on your sell. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's the only way to protect. Once again, it's all risk management at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And so it just makes it so that if the worst case scenario happened, your goal, And your agent's goal for you should always be that you leave unscathed, or as
Yeah.
much maybe
Or-
inconvenienced, but
Yeah.
financially unscathed would be
Yeah.
a good way to say it.
Yeah, because I mean, you're bringing in a whole nother like piece of the puzzle that you can't control. You can't control if those buyers go through with the purchase on your house.
Well, and just as another quick little side note, if you're selling your house and going to another state, make sure that both of your agents have communicated
Mm-hmm.
because every state's purchase contract is so much different and the
Mhm.
standards and everything are different in other states. And so you might have an agent in Idaho specifically saying, it's no big deal, this is a standard contract, but a standard contract in Idaho could be buyers can back out 1 day up until 1 day before the house closes or whatever.
That's what we ran into on this other deal.
Yeah.
It was another agent that did the 1 day, and then we're trying to put a deal under contract here, and it's like financing and appraisal is the 28th, settlement's the 29th, and we're like, how do we, like, that gives us no room to put something together here, really.
Yeah.
Unless it's after, or unless you sell that and then you move in like a week or like later, so that it's not like door to door. There would be a gap there. Yeah, there's a lot to think about here. Anything else that you guys can think of, like risk management for sellers to be aware of?
Just as a quick summarization, I think it's worth saying when you're under contract, packing up everything in your house that you don't hardly use before due diligence is probably okay. Starting to pack up things that maybe you're not using currently up until financing and appraisal is okay. And then after financing and appraisal is when you start packing up stuff that inconveniences your life. And then on top of that, understanding the next piece of it is understanding the dates that you have for earnest money and financing and appraisal and making sure that they correlate to keep you safe as well.
Yeah.
If you can focus on those things as you're going under contract or talk to your agent about it, I think that's what this podcast has been just talking about the entire time.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would also add like knowing your worst case scenario and then like
Yeah.
planning a backup for that afterwards. Like, you know, if I need to go and spend some time with family or get an Airbnb in between or like however things may line up that way.
Ask the question, what is my worst case scenario?
Yeah.
For sure. I think you're right.
And I think the worst case scenario is what if the buyer defaults like at these different time frames? What does that mean for you? And then just like you said, I wouldn't like. I'll have sellers be like, "Sweet, we're under contract. Let's start packing." I'm like, "No,
Cool.
no.
Yeah. Don't.
Yeah, don't do
Don't jump the
anything
gun.
that's going to change your life until we're past all these contingency dates, because anything could happen until that point."
Well, and as a seller, you have to acknowledge that the possibility of your life being inconvenienced is 100% there. And so if
100,
if things do happen not in a way that you want them to happen, don't focus on being like, "Oh man, I don't want this to affect my life negatively at all." You want to focus on how can I make it so that it affects me the least amount of negatively.
yeah,
Because I have a lot. I feel like I've got a lot of sellers that are like, "Well, how do we make sure that no matter what in every scenario, I don't have to lift a finger to worry about anything?" And if you go into it with that mindset and something bad happens, it's just going to be a lot harder than saying, "Okay, this is our plan for these scenarios. This is going to be an inconvenient situation."
yeah. There's always going to be some risk involved, like that just
And
happens.
inconvenienced. You're
Yeah.
going to be selling a home is hard.
Yeah.
Like
it's
not even just the contract, but like moving out of
Yeah.
your house
the process
is hard.
Yeah, it's disruptive.
Well,
Extremely.
And any agent that's ever like, "Well, so I'm going to make selling your house the easiest it possibly can be," if you've got it in your mind that this is going to be such a smooth and easy process, you're just not prepared for,
Yeah, your agent isn't there at midnight when you're like scrambling to get the last of the bags packed, and then you got to figure out how to clean and all that stuff.
or
Like,
when
it's-
your kids doesn't have any toilet paper at 2 a.m. because you packed up
Yeah.
on accident, your agent's not there for those parts for sure.
Oh,
I think it's worth saying though, or like to add that a lot of these deals don't run into issues,
no,
No, most of the time
Yeah.
for sure.
but
And-
I
but
think
it's good to have that contingency.
yeah. I think they easily can if you haven't done this a bunch and you're not aware of what's normal and standard and like how things run. That's a nice thing about having done so many deals. By repetition, we're like, oh, watch out for this pit, or trap. Because I think if like I've seen people work up contracts on their own, and I'm like, what were you doing here, or what were
What's
you
the
thinking?
thought process
Yeah,
there?
and it's just they didn't know. They're like, yeah, that sounds fine.
Well, and if something is stressing you out about selling your house, a huge problem with some real estate agents, I feel like, is that they do lull people that's standard. You know, they ask a question, they say that's standard. If there's something that's making you uncomfortable and it doesn't make sense to you, make sure that your agent explains it to you in a way that is simple enough for you to act on it.
Yeah.
And don't get lulled into, well, don't worry, that's standard. Don't worry, that's
yeah,
not
and
a
I
big
guess
deal.
you got to have an agent that you really trust because, I mean, an agent might say that's standard when it's not standard at all.
you
And
just
all they
don't
got to do
know.
is say it confidently.
Yeah.
Like if I hadn't been in this industry, I wouldn't know what is standard. So like, or if
Yeah.
I don't sell a lot of properties, it's like, ooh.
But even I deal with some agents. I'll do an offer or negotiate something, and they'll get all offended over something, and I'm like, it wasn't that crazy of an ask, you know. But
Well, and I just think about if somebody's submitting an offer on your house and it's $1 million house and they offer $2,000 of seller concessions, and having a seller say, this seems a little bit low, and I've seen situations where the agent says, well, that's just standard, and they're with no work on trying to protect his sellers, with no work on any of that
Yeah.
stuff, but just saying it's standard. And the people being like, well, I guess that's, shrugging your
that's the
shoulder. I guess
norm.
that's
Yeah.
normal.
yeah, 2,000 earnest money, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you said concessions.
Oh,
I see.
Jeez.
I was
I'm going to get out of here.
either way, that's not super typical or normal.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah. Well, hopefully this podcast just like kind of makes you think. There's a lot of like little hidden traps and things to be aware of. But I think this kind of covers from like the perspective of risk management and moving and your deadlines and stuff like that, how to best protect yourself and be aware. Whether we're helping you or another agent, hopefully it's helpful. So
Thanks for watching.
thanks, guys.